pleasure to be back with you right here on the India Development Debate on ET Now. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and let's turn focus to a big explosive interview and the aftermath of this. Have babus failed Prime Minister Modi in his efforts to usher in a new India? At least that's what one of the doyens of corporate India, Narayana Murthy, seems to suggest. In an exclusive interview with your channel right here, Murthy says that the Prime Minister has done all he could to catapult India into the League of Developed Nations, be it Swachh Bharat or the Make in India program. The intent was good, but when it comes to implementation, Murthy says there are huge gaps thanks to an indifferent bureaucracy. In fact, Murthy is not the first person to point fingers at babus. There is hardly anything to boast when it comes to taking the benefits of policies to the masses. So where do the fault lines really lie? Are impractical policies to be blamed, or is it all about an inefficient execution system? Let's take this straight across to a discussion right here on the India Development Debate tonight. And we're joined by a bevy of guests right here. But before I go across to them, let's actually put in focus what Narayana Murthy did tell us exclusively just yesterday.
How do I hold the Prime Minister responsible for the execution? You see, it is the bureaucracy that has to execute it. It is the bureaucracy at the central level, at the state level. I mean, it is not Mr. Modi's responsibility to go to every village and keep it clean. It is not Mr. Modi's responsibility to set right every department. His responsibility is to articulate a grand vision, lead by example, work hard. And I think he is doing all of that. Therefore, I don't think it is proper on anybody's part or my part to hold him responsible for execution. While we may have had strong individuals as leaders, whether it's Nehru or Ms. Modi or Indira Gandhi, whatever it is, somehow we have not paid the same level of attention to institutions. We have allowed our institutions to become weak.
Okay, let me take this across to a panel of experts who are joining us right here. This is going to be a political discussion as well. Mr. Y.K. Alag, eminent economist and former union minister, joins us right here. He's written extensively on bureaucracy in India. Sadanand Dhume, Western Fellow, American Enterprise Institute. And the politicians are represented by Mr. Narendra Taneja from the BJP and Gaurav Vallabh from the Congress Party. Thank you very much, all of you, for being with us. But let's begin with the experts. And Sadanand, has bureaucracy really let Mr. Modi down as Narayana Murthy seems to suggest here, at least in his first tenure as Prime Minister?
A really big question, Supriya, and I tend to view Mr. Murthy's comments as a bit of a cop-out, right? You can't criticize the boss, so you criticize the people around the boss. Now, you can make the argument that over time, India's institutions, including the civil service, have decayed in their ability to deliver. That's a fair discussion we can have. But, you know, ultimately the buck has to stop at the top with the top politician. Nobody expects Mr. Modi to go to every village and personally clean it. But if Mr. Modi has decided a policy, it's up to him to choose the best instruments to implement that policy. And if that policy, whatever it may be, is failing to be implemented well, then the buck has to stop with him.
Okay, fair point indeed. You know, a cop-out of a statement there. When you can't blame the top boss, the buck has to stop with him. But let me take this across to Mr. Narendra Taneja. And Mr. Taneja, is blaming the bureaucracy oversimplifying the situation? Because, you know, engagement differs from scheme to scheme between a politician on one hand and the bureaucracy on the other. And many people will turn around and ask, are impractical policies to be blamed, or is it really about inefficient execution system? Are we oversimplifying it by completely blaming the bureaucracy here?
Well, first thing first, Supriya, I agree with you 100%. It's oversimplification. You know, Mr. Narayana Murthy is known for expressing his views very candidly, and I appreciate that. And at one time, he was also an aspirant to be the President of India, so he probably follows politics very closely. But first thing is the Prime Minister. He has succeeded. I mean, look at all various schemes. I'm taking a very neutral view. I'm very impressed the way all the entire team in the Ministry of Finance and a couple of other departments, the way they work, for instance, on GST. I think they did a fantastic work. And the same goes for a number of other schemes. The Prime Minister is hugely successful. You go and talk with the people. Look what is happening in various states. The way state after state, they're voting for BJP, and in particular for the Prime Minister. So I think, but at the same time, there are always some very good people, some very competent people, some world-class people, and there are some people who may not be so good or may not be absolutely world-class. So, I mean, that's human. So, except for that, but it does mean that entire bureaucracy is very great or very good. No, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying that they're very good people, very competent people, and some people may not be very competent, as Mr. Narayana Murthy is trying to say. But to generalize and say that, look at bureaucracy in black and white, I don't think that's fair. I think majority people done a fantastic work. I interact with them on daily basis, with many of them. And the Prime Minister has been hugely successful, his team hugely successful, many of the bureaucrats hugely successful. By and large, bureaucracy has done a good job. So I personally, I think,
okay.
and
so
many areas,
large,
electrification of villages wouldn't have been possible without bureaucracy's involvement.
Fair point.
Yeah, by and large.
Okay, Mr. Taneja, give me a minute there. Are certain schemes going to be possible without efficient bureaucrats? The answer to that is no. As a member of the ruling party, you do not believe the bureaucrats have failed the Prime Minister. You believe they've done a fantastic job. At least a majority of them have. That's your stand. Let me go across to the Congress party, because there are many who will say that schemes did not take off the way they should have, and does the blame lie on the bureaucracy and the execution? But anyways, Gaurav Vallabh, there are many out there who are going to blame the bureaucracy, but there are many who will also believe that several steps have been taken by the government to discipline the bureaucracy. It's a daunting task. Submission of immovable property returns by IAS officers, and a failure to do so would lead to a denial of vigilance clearances and, needed for promotions and foreign postings. Now, obviously, the bureaucracy has to implement that. Bureaucracy is not known to be accountable by and large. Is that why they are unwilling? The fact that the government is trying to discipline them, which is perhaps being counterproductive.
See, Supriya, Mr. Narayana Murthy, as the BJP spokesperson is pointing out, is known in the country for his direct message, to the point message. So the message is very clear that he feels that schemes of the Modi government are not giving the desired results what government had expected. First point. Second thing, which I am asking, that can a CEO of a company can say that I am not able to get the profit targets because my vice president marketing had not worked, my VP finance had not worked. That is not an excuse for a CEO. I am asking, third point which I am putting in front of your viewers, that I am asking that bureaucrats are not aware of most of the schemes before they are not announced. I am giving item by item. Demonetization, our finance ministry or the bureaucrats of finance ministry are aware that this scam is going to happen. GST implementation, the way it is implemented, because at 12 o'clock midnight, bureaucrats require time to prepare. No, I am coming point by point. So they require time to implement.
I am asking you a direct question. Please answer that.
That you have to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I answering a very direct question. Bureaucrats require a time to think.
Okay.
It's not that you first of all decide the scheme and then ask them to implement. You have to make them in the same boat from day zero. But here what is happening? Prime Minister announced the scheme and bureaucracy is aware of that scheme afterwards. The same is same is true for Rafael also. The Prime Minister announced and Ministry of Defence got to know after the announcement.
Okay, let me take your thought forward. Gaurav Vallabh, let me take your thought forward. And Mr. Alag is an extremely senior commentator. He's been a part of the government. Let's take this across to him. There are two sides to this argument, Mr. Alag. One side is that there are those who believe that the bureaucrats have failed the Prime Minister, and there are those like the former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan who say that there is over-centralization, and this is a big problem in India today. Do you believe Mr. Modi erred in managing India like he managed Gujarat, which was a very successful enterprise model, but that model could not have been implemented for the rest of this country? Is there over-centralization that one should blame on this count?
I think I would rather answer that question in terms of systems rather than individuals. I think simply talking about the Prime Minister is not the issue. The issue really is that when we look at all the reform systems that have been advocated for the bureaucracy, I also chaired a committee which went into the whole question of the training and the responsibilities of the higher civil services, lifetime training. The issue really was, do you have rule-based systems with which bureaucracy responds to the needs? And what was suggested was that there should be, apart from lifetime training, which has been implemented, but the whole question of how do you evaluate a civil servant, now that has not been implemented. And there the Administrative Reforms Commission, the Alak Committee and so on, they had made a number of proposals, which is that you have evaluation by peer groups, you have evaluation by seniors, you have evaluation also by the public. There is nothing which stops you from, finding out from people what they think of a collector or what they think of the implementation of a scheme. Now, there, I think it has been rightly said that given Indian politics, the ruling party will say yes, their supporters, and the opposition will try to get votes to say no. But, there has been a proposal, for example, in the committee that I chaired, and it had very senior retired officers of the IAS, IPS.
Mr. Alag,
auditor.
Mr. Alag, you've spoken about
that you ask a few senior people.
You've spoken about the committees. Give me a minute, and I appreciate this all-round, appraisal that you're talking about. Extremely important, and people who suffer, those bureaucrats, actually should be the ones who should be apprising them. But Sadanand, if I may come to you, it's easy for us to blame bureaucrats, and very often we do, for failed execution and implementation. But is there a certain unwillingness on the part of bureaucrats due to the fear of prosecution later? It's only now that we have a Prevention of Corruption Act that's perhaps going to, ring fences them in many ways. It wasn't there before, and which is perhaps why bureaucrats are unwilling, and may I also say, don't want to take the initiative to act on their own, to implement the schemes, because you never know what they're hollowed up with. You see an Ashok Chawla, and his name appears in a charge sheet. He's had to resign as a chairman on the board of Yes Bank. These are things that come back and haunt you 10, 15 years later after you've done with service. Who would want to be harassed like that?
I'll answer that question, Supriya, but let me just step back for a moment first, because I think what we're discussing over here are two analytically separable things. The first is, has Mr. Modi relied too much on the bureaucracy? That's the big question about centralization, about whether he simply tried to replicate what he did as a chief minister, as a prime minister, and so on. And the second question is that within that, have the bureaucrats delivered or not? And so on the second question, I think that's going to vary from, program to program, scheme to scheme. For example, maybe they've done a fairly good job in terms of building toilets. I personally think they did a disastrous job in terms of implementing GST, but opinions can vary about which bureaucrats did what well, okay? But the larger philosophical question is, should the prime minister have relied so heavily on the bureaucracy, and not just the IAS, but on the income tax and the other services? And here my view is that this has been one of the most bureaucracy-heavy governments that we have seen, certainly the most bureaucracy-heavy government we've seen in the post-liberalization era, and that is fundamentally a mistake. So that's kind of on the philosophical question. Now, on your sort of narrower point about how bureaucrats have been stymied, that's certainly true. That's certainly something that was an overhang from the UPA years. And again, the government has moved towards making it easier for bureaucrats to make tough decisions. But the larger issue really is this: why are bureaucrats so absolutely central to everything this government does? And should they be relying more, for instance, on outside technocrats, more on market mechanisms? We've seen the bureaucrats absolutely flub the demonetization exercise. We've seen the bureaucrats, the way they rolled out GST was frankly a comedy of errors. Why should we give them credit for this? And if they are not able to execute, should the government be looking at alternative ways to achieve its policy objectives?
No, you raise an important point about the alternate ways to achieve policy objectives, and they tried to do that. There aren't enough specialists, insufficient training. They tried to do that. They even advertised, and Naren Taneja answered this question for me. An extremely good decision. Lateral entry of 10 joint secretary level positions. But it's happening in the last year of your government. This should have happened in the first year of your government, and that would have made a huge difference. Why wait till the last leg of your government to bring about a reform like this? And I will, of course, take on the question of how many have applied and all of that in just a bit. But this was a remarkable thing to do, to get in technocrats, to get in specialists. But why do it in the last year? You should have done it as soon as you came into office. You would have had perhaps, better results by now.
Well, it depends what your priorities are. Our priorities were very different. 67% Indians no access to bank account. Should we address that first or not? You see, so there were many other things. Many people living, without electricity, millions and millions and millions. Should we address and attend to that first? We decided to address and attend to those things first. The question is that if your question is that India should have gone, or we should actually go for administrative reform. If you may recollect, Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he first became the Prime Minister, within first 30 days, he talked about it. The administrative reforms, he even set up a committee. Nothing happened. But do we need administrative reforms? Answer is yes, absolutely yes. And I agree with my co-panelists that we need to bring in more people. We need to have a kind of a structure or the architecture with more windows and doors, so that people with talent especially could come in, whether it's foreign policy or economic policy or development and so on and so forth. Answer to all these questions is absolutely yes. But all I want to point out is, since I know how these things function, all these things require more work, and more participation by parliament, other stakeholders, including political parties. Because the moment you try to do something which is very fundamental, people will say, oh, look, the institutions' independence is being compromised. You live with the kind of days we live in these days. So this has to be something which has to be kind of, nothing to do with only one party. And we are talking of states also. We have various political parties. But just one quick point I want to say, in terms of centralization or over-centralization, depends how you look at it. But if you look at the history, I'm not talking philosophy, I'm talking cold historical fact. India has been in terms of the power structure, over-centralized since the time of Emperor Ashoka. Akbar was the same, Aurangzeb was the same, Britishers were the same, Pandit Nehru was the same, Indiraji was the same. But do we need to decentralize more? Answer again to that question, absolutely yes. But the question is, how do we get it?
Right.
And it is important. We need more debate and national debate.
I understand.
And build a roadmap together with all political parties and the public opinion.
No, I understand that. I appreciate it. What I don't understand is that you could have done both. You could have had priority of getting many Indians bank accounts. It now turns out they weren't perhaps the best thing to do, but you could have also done this. That's all that I'm going to say. But the Congress party is to be equally blamed for weakening the bureaucracy, for not bringing in administrative reforms for the time that you were in office. I mean, how are you going to today attack the government on blaming the babus? You pretty much did not do anything on administrative reforms either, and you've been in government for far longer than they've been. Gaurav Vallabh.
See, Supriya, blaming bureaucracy is not the solution. We implemented Narega, the same bureaucracy was there, the results were achieved. We implemented the loan waivers for farmers, the same bureaucracy were there, the results were out. Problem is that you are not having the coordination. I will give you an example, that when you are launching Make in India, just before launching Make in India, you are doing demonetization. Now tell me, by demonetization, the entire MSME sector will be gone for at least 10 years. Now, with that, can you have a manufacturing or Make in India? The same is there. You are launching Namami Gange, but the Ministry of Environment is not in loop. The Ministry of Water Resources is not in loop. You are launching Smart City, 100 Smart City, but what about the rural development? That is not in loop. Where the smart cities will be there? Should we launch in phase manner? The bureaucracy should be taken from the day zero. But what government is interested, that they want a chest thumping type of attitude, that we want to launch 100 smart cities. But what is the delivery? Nothing. Today everybody knows that not more than 1% of the budget allocated for smart city is used for making any cities little bit smart also.
Okay.
So coordination is required. And
Gaurav Vallabh, I get your point. I understand.
From day
I understand.
Zero.
Coordination is required. Everybody has to be kept in the loop. It can't be done in isolation. But Vaikya Alag, 6,000 applications were received for 10 joint secretary level positions. Compare that to 28 million people who applied for 90,000 railway jobs. Category 4 railway jobs, 90,000 railway jobs were advertised. And 28 million people applied. You've just got 6,000 applications for joint secretary level positions that could be making serious difference to the economic landscape, to the decision-making process and all of that. Is this also a sad reflection of the fact that we find it very easy to blame the babus, but when it comes to giving up our cushy corporate jobs, it's very, most people find it difficult to trade off the big money, the perks that come with it. People find it very difficult to trade off. So it's easy to blame the bureaucrats in that sense. And if let's just get that question out of the way before.
Listen, I mean, I think this whole business of advertising for getting talent at the top is, in my mind, somewhat peculiar. Nobody who is really worth it is going to apply for a job like that. I mean, talent from outside the government has been there in the government from the 60s and the 70s. I'm sorry, but I'm a university professor, and thrice I've been asked to go to Delhi with the ranks of additional secretary, secretary to the government and so on. There was Nitin Desai, who was with the Tata Consultants. There was Vijay Kelkar, who was with the Ford Foundation. I mean, we've had people coming. Monte Ahluwalia was brought in from the World Bank. We have had people coming in from outside. People were picked up. They were picked up by a certain group of people in the Department of Personnel. They were asked to come, and they had to then face the Union Public Service Commission, which, called in applications of concerned people. So this whole business of advertising for people at the level of a joint secretary is amazing. Nobody I know whom I would even remotely consider for a joint secretary will ever apply for such a position. You have to put the word around. You have to ask people, will you ask, so and so to look into this and let us have a few names, and then somebody takes a call.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, the process should be fair. They should go. Absolutely. Then that's not
right.
being done. I mean, this is amazing the way this has been done.
Exactly. No, I think that's a very important point that you raised, that anybody worth being recruited at that sort of a position is not going to apply for a job application. They need to be handpicked. And in that count, Narendra Taneja, I must point out that the record has been extremely dismal as far as those handpicked resources are concerned. The big red on your government's report card is the relationship with expat specialists. I mean, people like Raghuram Rajan and Arvind Subramanian, to some extent Arvind Panagaria. The pulls and pressures are very different, and which is why we've not had a coherent vision to deal with people like them. And truth be told, we can get into a headlong discussion about Desi versus the Swadesi economists, but these were men and women of great caliber who could have brought in a lot of, value to the table. Look at how they were treated, and I'm not just saying the government treated them badly, but the narrative around them by certain sections of the BJP itself. The kind of accusations that came in. Do you believe you failed to treat the expat specialists very well, and which is why the messaging got all wrong?
No, it's not expat and, those who are kind of based here or homegrown, depends how you want to look at Supriya. It's not that simple. We need to build an ecosystem for that. You need to build ecosystem, you need to build institutions. One of my co-panelists is probably based in the US, or he is associated with US think tank, if I remember right. In America, they have this revolving door system. There are think tanks very close to Democratic Party, others close to the Republican president, and many of them move to the government. It's easy, because they have the right credentials, right background, many of them the right exposure. So there is an ecosystem which is in place, which they built over the years, over the decade. We need to build something like that. I mean, to say, without building the ecosystem first and build such institutions so that we can clearly identify the individuals who probably would be the right people to do it. Otherwise, what happened? You pick up someone from, let's say, we ask you, Supriya, that please come as joint secretary. Other channels are going to run stories against you. Or people are going to say, oh, this man has RSS affiliation, or this affiliation and that affiliation. So see, I think we need to build this, and we all need to do it together. I don't want to get like my friend from the Congress, with all due respect. This debate, I'm not treating as tutu meme Congress. No, it's not. We need to build this ecosystem together.
Absolutely.
And it's going to take time. Institutions take years to build.
Right. I think you raise an important point that I wonder if I should hold you to your word as far as this joint secretary level position is concerned. But jokes apart, and Sadanan, coming to you, one of the problems is the bureaucracy is failing. The other side of the problem is the shortage of bureaucrats. I mean, what explains the fact that there is a shortfall of nearly 1,449 officers across the country? For the center, the ideal situation is 1,417 IS officers. There are only 486. Why not recruit more?
I mean, there are all kinds of things going on, Supriya. One is, I think Mr. Taneja's point is well taken. There is just there's just a particularly weak bench strength. And if I may say so, that's particularly true in the case of the BJP, because it has not traditionally been the ruling party. So what the BJP has been looking for is people who have a combination of expertise and loyalty. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what political parties do around the world. Unfortunately, in the BJP's case, many of the people who have the loyalty are simply lack competence or expertise. And many of the people who have the expertise, for various reasons, don't want to be associated with a party which has, frankly, some pretty harebrained characters, particularly on the fringes. So that has really affected the party's ability, but in particular, to attract top-notch economic talent. Hopefully, over time, this is something that they will be able to iron out. On the larger, and then they're also battling with another issue, which is a kind of, inbuilt anti-elitism, this notion that, the IAS must be put in its place and so on. And I think all of this, ends up being disruptive. And finally, you pair this to the fact that, with the fact that in many ways, this is a government that is driving policy through the bureaucracy, which is kind of so that it's almost as though, right, in different ways, they're kind of contradicting each other. And I'm afraid that this is something that is going to take a long time to shake out and settle down.
Right. A quick last word, and Mr. Alag, I will just request you to make it brief because I've already breached timing here. A quick last word is that we expect a lot out of our bureaucrats, just like we expect a lot of our politicians. But as a society, are we willing to put on issues before ourselves? And economic transformation is not going to be possible unless there is cultural transformation. And to go back to Mr. Murthy's point that he makes, that culture is a big issue to be transformed. It's very easy for us to blame people. We don't want to face the problems. We don't want to take the initiatives. It's best to blame the babus. Do you find some element of truth in there?
There's a lot of truth in that. We have systematically destroyed institutions, local government institutions, panchayati raj institutions, the planning process, which is a coordinating process. Now, I'm not saying that the old planning commission should have continued, but listen, when China abolished the planning commission, it set up an alternative group which had very specified tasks. We didn't give the Niti Aayog that strategic dimension. That should have been done. What have we done in terms of building up local self-institutions? Very little. The bureaucrats can only be a part of those systems. Otherwise, you go around blaming the bureaucracy. And again, you have really not done some of these things in the best possible way. Don't want to get into whether it's the Prime Minister or the system which has not done it. That's a separate issue. But we have really not built up the institutions in which bureaucrats can function. And so you see that when a good collector is transferred, the panchayats protest. We have seen that at Pune. We have seen at other places. That when a good bureaucrat, an honest bureaucrat is sent away, it is the other institutions which he is supposed to be championing and which he does champion, they are the ones that protest. It is that process of
Mr. Alag, I'm sorry, it's a very good point, a very cogent point that you're making, but I've completely run out of time here. I will have to cut you short there. But thank you very, very much for sparing time out this evening and speaking to us. Mr. YK Alag, Mr. Narayana Taneja, Gaurav Vallabh, Sadanand Dume, thank you very much for putting it all in perspective. We had an exclusive conversation with Narayana Murthy where he says the bureaucracy has let the Prime Minister down. It was apt for us to put the spotlight to where it belongs. Have the bureaucrats really failed Mr. Modi? We take a quick breather. There's plenty more that's coming up right here on ET Now. Stay tuned.